At 31, Olivia Reed lived in a dim, one-bedroom apartment tucked into the back corner of an aging building in Seattle's Capitol Hill district. The walls carried the scent of old rain and forgotten ambition, and each creak in the floor seemed to echo back at her with the same question she'd been avoiding for years. What happened to you? Once the pride of her small-town family in Spokane, Olivia had been the one who would make it. She'd won scholarships, led debate teams, and been accepted into one of the most competitive pre-med programs in the state. Her parents had told anyone who would listen that their daughter was going to be a doctor, a real one, a meaningful one, the kind who saved lives. And for a while, Olivia had believed them. But somewhere between midnight dissections and weeks of clinical rotations, she stopped sleeping. Her hands shook from too much coffee and too little rest. Her textbooks blurred into one long, accusatory smear. She felt her identity fracture slowly, invisibly, like glass under pressure. And when she walked out of her neurobiology final and never returned, the silence from her family was deafening. They didn't ask why. They didn't ask how. They asked when she would stop wasting her potential. Her mother, once so eager to proofread her essays and pack extra snacks into her college care packages, reduced their calls to brisk 2-minute check-ins. "You'll go back," she'd say, not as encouragement but as command. "You're just confused right now." Her father, a man who had fixed engines for 30 years and admired medicine like it was alchemy, couldn't look at her without his jaw tightening. And her younger brother, Ryan, always in her shadow, always told to be more like your sister, seemed almost relieved to let the pedestal burn. In truth, Olivia didn't blame them. How could they understand that walking away hadn't been giving up, it had been survival? That the stethoscope had become a noose, and the pristine white coat felt more like a shroud? Still, it hurt deeply and daily. She carried the label of quitter like a scar stitched too close to the bone. Even in her smallest victories, teaching computer basics to elderly neighbors, getting a stranger to smile at a public library help desk, she felt invisible. Nothing she did seemed to count unless it came with a title, a paycheck, or a degree to hang on a wall. In a family that measured success in prestige and permanence, Olivia had become the cautionary tale. To them, she was the girl who gave up. To her, she was the woman who survived. But no one had asked her story. Not really. And she wasn't ready to tell it. Not yet. There was no grand unveiling, no press release, no round of applause. Elderbright was born, like most things that last, out of quiet necessity. It began with a name scribbled on the corner of a recycled notepad and a simple question that wouldn't let Olivia sleep. What if we stopped treating older people like they were fading away? The idea had been simmering inside her long before she found the words for it. It had taken root during those library shifts, watching hands tremble over keyboards, eyes squint at screens, people apologizing for not knowing what a PDF was. They didn't need charity. They needed dignity, empowerment. They needed to feel seen, not managed. And Olivia, who knew too well what it felt like to be quietly dismissed, felt a quiet fire grow every time someone left her desk standing just a little taller. She used the little money she had saved to register a domain name, elderbright.org. It felt strange at first, ambitious, almost laughable. But she bought it anyway. Designed the site herself, teaching HTML through late-night YouTube videos and caffeine-laced tutorials. She made mistakes. A lot of them. Pages crashed. Forms glitched. And yet every time she fixed something, every tiny triumph, it was like reclaiming another piece of herself. She wasn't a doctor, but she was building something that could still heal. The first program was a free class on basic computer literacy. 5 people showed up. Then 11. Then 23. It wasn't just the elderly who came, it was their children, their neighbors, their caretakers. People who had given up on catching up. Olivia greeted each one like they mattered because they did. She didn't talk down to them. She didn't rush. She listened closely like their words were maps and adapted the way she taught to the way they learned. What surprised her most wasn't the growth. It was the transformation. There was Harold, a retired machinist who hadn't spoken to his granddaughter in 5 years because he didn't know how to use FaceTime. There was Mrs. Chow, who cried when she received her first email and found it was a photo of her great-grandson. There was Joel, who used to run a bookstore before Amazon devoured his business, now learning how to create an online archive of his poetry. They weren't just learning, they were reclaiming something deeper: relevance, agency, pride. As word spread, Elderbright evolved. Olivia partnered with community centers, applied for grants with shaky hands and sleepless nights. She wrote proposals the way she used to write essays in med school, tight, urgent, like her life depended on them. Sometimes she was rejected. Often, she was ignored. But when a small foundation called and said they believed in what she was building, Olivia cried in the stairwell, forehead pressed to the wall, breath stolen by a kind of gratitude that hurt in the best way. She hired her first staff member, a woman named Teresa, once a schoolteacher, recently widowed, who brought warmth and quiet authority into every room. Then came a software developer, a project coordinator, a part-time grant writer. Elderbright grew, not like wildfire, but like roots, patient, deep, steady. And as it grew, Olivia found herself changing too. Her movements were no longer hesitant. Her voice, once thick with self-doubt, had taken on a clarity she hadn't expected. People called her a founder, now a social entrepreneur, even a community innovator. But she didn't cling to those titles. What mattered most was that she could walk into a room of people who once felt invisible and show them they were not. Each workshop ended with laughter, with shared stories, with hands raised not in confusion, but in confidence. And late at night, Olivia would sit by her window with a blanket around her shoulders and wonder how she had once believed she was a failure. How no one had seen this in her, not even herself. But maybe that was the most powerful part. Elderbright hadn't risen because someone gave her permission. It rose because she stopped waiting to be saved and started believing she could serve. And in that quiet, ordinary revolution, she had done something extraordinary. The award ceremony was beautiful in the way these things often are: warm lighting, slow jazz in the background, small bites on tiny plates, strangers shaking her hand like they'd known her forever. Olivia stood on that stage in a navy dress she had borrowed, holding a glass plaque that read Civic Impact Innovator of the Year, and smiled into the applause. Her name was printed in gold, sharp and clean, under the name of the foundation that had funded Elderbright's expansion to 5 cities. She thanked them all. She thanked her team. She thanked the community. She did not thank her family. Afterward, in the quiet of her apartment, she sat on the edge of her bed with her phone glowing dimly in her lap. She had sent the live stream link to her parents. She had texted her brother, even though his replies had grown thinner each year. There were no messages. No missed calls. No, you looked beautiful up there. No, we're proud of you. Just silence, as precise and cold as a scalpel. The next morning she called them. It had been a while. Her mother answered. Her voice was tight and distant, the way it got when she didn't know how to say what she really meant. We watched a little, she said. It's good that you're keeping busy. Keeping busy. 2 words that collapsed months of labor and heartache into something ornamental, like a hobby, like a consolation prize for someone who had failed at something bigger. Olivia bit her tongue until it almost bled. Her father came on the line for a moment, grunted something about traffic and the new neighbor's lawn. Then a pause. So he said, "Are you still thinking about going back to med school at some point? Now that things have calmed down?" She closed her eyes. Her stomach curled the way it used to before exams. She couldn't afford to fail. That old shame returned like a ghost. Thin, familiar, unwelcome. She didn't say what she was thinking. That ship sank. And I learned to breathe underwater. Instead, she told them Elderbright was growing. That she had staff now. That they were partnering with tech firms for accessible software. That one of their students had gotten a remote job at 62. She described the tears in Mrs. Chow's eyes when she sent her first online grocery order. The way Joel had organized his poetry archive with hyperlinks. There was silence. Then her mother asked, "But is it sustainable? You know, long-term? It's not exactly medicine." Olivia smiled, but there was no warmth in it. Just bone. They wanted white coats. They wanted diplomas with seals. They wanted to say, "My daughter's a doctor," with that flicker of pride in grocery store conversations with old friends. Not this soft, unglamorous rebuilding, this labor that couldn't be explained in titles or acronyms. They didn't see that she was building a world from scratch, that she was lifting others as she rose, that she had already healed more people with compassion and code and patience than she ever could with a scalpel. To them, she had traded greatness for good enough. She hung up gently, made tea, and stared at the plaque on her shelf. It glinted in the sunlight like a quiet rebuttal. Not to them. To the voice in her head that still whispered their doubts, like gospel. They might never understand. They might never see Elderbright as success. But Olivia was learning to live without needing that kind of approval. She was learning that not everyone will clap for you, especially not the people who had drawn a different map for your life. And that's okay, because she was no longer following their map. She was building her own, step by imperfect step, word by unsent word. And maybe that was the most defiant thing of all. The ceremony ended hours ago, but Olivia still hadn't taken off her dress. She sat alone on the living room couch, heels discarded to the side, the navy fabric now slightly creased under the weight of her silence. The award, sleek, transparent, etched with her name and the words Social Impact Innovator, rested gently on the coffee table like a witness to something both triumphant and quietly devastating. Outside, the city pulsed with noise and headlights, but inside, her world had narrowed to the blinking cursor of an unanswered message. "Hey Mom, hey Dad, did you see the stream?" It sat in her family group chat like a question flung into a canyon, waiting for an echo that would never come. She had won. She had stood on stage while a room full of strangers clapped and smiled and thanked her. She had spoken about dignity and digital literacy and how the smallest acts, teaching an elder to use a smartphone, helping someone reconnect with a distant child, could restore entire lifetimes. But even as she spoke, a small, old ache throbbed beneath the surface. Will they finally see me now? She called the next day, hoping that maybe, just maybe, the silence had been a fluke. Her mother picked up. Her voice was cautious, almost apologetic. "We caught some of it," she said, as though admitting to watching a soap opera. "Some of it. It looked very polished," she added. "Polished." Olivia let the words settle into her chest like a stone. Her throat was tight, but she pushed forward, told them about the expansion into more cities, about the grant she'd secured, about the elders who had cried because someone finally made them feel seen. There was a long pause, and then came her father's voice, gruff and familiar. "That's all well and good," he said. "But any thoughts about giving med school another shot? You were so close. Just one more application cycle. Maybe this time, as though all this, her real work, her real success, were just a detour, a phase, a graceful loss." She couldn't breathe for a second. It wasn't just the words, it was what lay beneath them. "This isn't enough. You are still not enough." She hung up shortly after, politely, like someone excusing herself from a table that had long since stopped offering her nourishment. The truth was, she no longer knew what more they needed to believe in her. A headline? A bank account? A title with Latin? And yet, even knowing all she knew, even standing on her own 2 feet, she still hurt. Not because she needed their permission to matter, but because, deep down, she had once built her entire self around their approval. She turned back to the room, to the quiet glow of the plaque. Around it were little signs of a life being lived fully, stickies with elder testimonials, a folded thank you note from her intern, an email from a 76-year-old woman in rural Georgia who now taught Zoom yoga to other seniors. This was real. This was impact. This was hers. They didn't clap, but others did. They didn't say, "We're proud of you," but strangers had. And Olivia was learning that pride, true pride, sometimes had to be planted from within, watered not by applause, but by the unshakable knowing that what you are doing matters, even when no one you love says so. Still, she wept that night, not from weakness, but from the slow release of expectations that had followed her for decades like shadows. She wept because some losses must be mourned, even when they look like survival. And in the morning, she rose again. Not for them, for herself, and for every person who had ever been told they weren't enough, until they proved otherwise. The message arrived in the middle of a mundane Tuesday, one of those days Olivia had almost mistaken for peace. She was in the middle of drafting a proposal for a digital inclusion fund when her phone buzzed twice, then once more with the unmistakable ping of a video file. The sender's name stopped her breath. Elena, her brother's fiancée. They hadn't spoken much. Elena had always felt like a polite shadow on the edge of family events, present, smiling, but careful not to step into the complex current that ran beneath Olivia's interactions with her parents. So the message felt strange, intimate in a way that was both surprising and oddly urgent. The video was only 58 seconds. She hesitated before playing it, thumb hovering over the screen. Her first thought was fear. Not dread, but the subtler, more corrosive fear. What now? She pressed play. It began with Elena's face, slightly flushed, clearly filmed in a hurry. Her voice trembled, not with nerves, but with something heavier. Hi, Olivia. I hope this isn't overstepping, but I needed to send this to you. Then the frame shifted. The camera was turned around, and Olivia saw him, Noah, her younger brother. He didn't know he was being recorded. He was sitting at their parents' kitchen table, his hands clasped around a coffee mug, eyes red-rimmed from either anger or grief. It was hard to tell which. I don't know how she does it, he was saying, his voice low, as if it were dangerous to speak louder. Liv, she built something from nothing. She helps people every damn day, and they still talk about her like she's a disappointment. He laughed bitterly. I swear to God, if I ever get to half her strength, I'll consider myself a success. She's the only one who never gave up on who she was, even when none of us made it easy. The video ended. Olivia stared at the screen for a long time, not moving, not even breathing. Something inside her shifted, sharp and slow, like ice cracking underfoot. She wasn't sure what hit her harder, the raw truth in Noah's voice, or the simple fact that he had seen her. Not through curated Instagram reels or official bios, but in the messy, exhausting, beautiful reality of what she had built and endured. A sob escaped her lips before she could catch it. Not of sadness, but of something deeper, recognition. All this time, she had believed she was invisible to them. That no matter how loud her impact was out in the world, at home, she would always be the sister who quit med school, the daughter who didn't stay in the mold. But in that single, unguarded minute, the narrative cracked. It had never been that they didn't see her. It was that they didn't know how to hold what they saw. And Noah, her brother, the quiet observer who had inherited the same impossible expectations, had spoken aloud the thing she had needed most. You matter. You are seen. Even here. She replied to Elena with no words, only a voice message, choked, grateful, quiet. Thank you. That night, Olivia didn't sleep. Not because of pain, but because something in her was finally waking up. She began printing photos, snapshots of elders laughing in digital classrooms, handwritten letters from those she'd helped reconnect with long-lost family, a picture of herself hugging a 90-year-old client in tears after a Zoom call with her grandson. She arranged them on the wall above her desk. Her wall of proof. Not for them. Not anymore. But just in case she ever forgot again. Sometimes, redemption comes not from grand gestures, but from a voice you never expected, cutting through the static to say, I saw you. I understand now. You were never the failure. And from that day on, Olivia worked not just with conviction, but with clarity. She had already changed the world. Now, she was finally ready to own it. It wasn't planned. Olivia hadn't gone to the family dinner intending to ignite anything. She had learned to survive these gatherings with a quiet grace, smiles at the right moments, deflections at every condescending remark, shrinking herself into the space between the furniture and the old family narratives. But something had changed in her. Since the video. Since Noah. She arrived early, bringing a bottle of wine she knew no one would mention. The same hallway, the same scent of lemongrass and furniture polish. The same framed portraits of academic triumphs, her parents' degrees, Noah's law firm offer letter, and the glaring absence of anything bearing her name. A gallery of silent omission. Dinner began with polite chit-chat. Her mother asked about Noah's promotion. Her father commented on the markets. No one asked Olivia anything beyond the obligatory. Still doing your little tech thing? She nodded.
Yes.
Still helping the elderly access healthcare, legal aid, and reconnect with their families online. We just expanded into 3 provinces. Over 40,000 people reached this year. She said it calmly, almost too calmly. Silence. Then her mother offered a strained smile. That's sweet. I'm sure they appreciate the help.
Sweet.
That word always tasted like poison. Olivia opened her mouth to reply, then closed it. She pushed back her chair. She stood. I need to say something. The table fell quiet. Her father's fork clinked against the plate. Noah looked up. His eyes, so steady now, locked with hers in quiet encouragement. I know I've been the ghost of this family, Olivia began, her voice shaking but growing with every word. I know I disappointed you when I left med school. I know you thought I was wasting my life building something you didn't understand. Her mother's lips parted, as if to interrupt, but Olivia lifted her hand, gently but firmly. Let me finish. I'm not asking for applause. I've learned to live without it. But what I won't do anymore is sit quietly while you pretend I've done nothing. Her voice cracked. Because I have. I've sat with veterans who hadn't spoken to their children in 20 years, until I helped them set up a video call. I've trained women in rural districts to use legal portals to file protection orders. I've watched grandmothers cry when they saw their newborn grandchildren's faces on a screen, thousands of miles away. That may not fit in a frame on your wall, but it matters. A long, terrible pause. Her father's expression was unreadable. Her mother was blinking fast, lips pressed thin. But it was Noah who moved first. He stood beside her. She's telling the truth, he said. And if none of you can see the dignity in what she's built, then maybe it's not Liv who should feel ashamed. Then, something unexpected. Her father cleared his throat. He didn't look at her directly, but his voice was quieter than she'd ever heard it. I watched that documentary about your nonprofit, he said. The one on Channel 5. Didn't know you were in talks with the ministry for funding expansion. Olivia froze. He added, almost reluctantly, it was impressive. Her mother, ever the last to concede, exhaled softly. I suppose we were wrong to dismiss it as a phase. It wasn't a dramatic apology. It wasn't tears or hugs or years of silence shattered all at once. But it was something. It was the brittle edge of pride slipping through the cracks. It was a family beginning to reckon, however awkwardly, with its own blind spots. And as Olivia sat back down, Noah beside her like a quiet pillar, she didn't feel triumphant. She felt whole. For the first time, the girl who had left to become someone they couldn't imagine had returned as a woman they could no longer ignore. Recognition hadn't come from headlines or awards or even the people she served. It came in the form of confrontation, of claiming space in a room that had once made her feel invisible. And by standing tall, she had changed not just the story they told about her, but the story she told about herself. It didn't happen with a grand gesture, nor did it come overnight. The transformation crept in like early dawn, soft, almost imperceptible at first, until suddenly the room was full of light. In the weeks that followed that pivotal family dinner, Olivia noticed a strange quietness. Not the kind she'd grown up with, heavy with unspoken disappointment, but a new kind, laced with hesitation and the fragile beginnings of curiosity. Her father forwarded her an article on digital equity one morning. No commentary, just a link. Her mother sent a photo of their neighbor, an elderly woman Olivia had helped months ago. Mrs. Hahn says thank you again, she'd written. She calls you her angel. There were still awkward silences, still moments when old habits flared up, subtle dismissals, the occasional backhanded remark. But they no longer cut as deeply. Perhaps because something in Olivia had shifted too. She no longer needed validation the way she once did. She had carved out a space in the world where her worth wasn't dependent on their approval. But even so, she felt it, the slow thaw. Noah, always her quiet ally, became more vocal in her defense. He started referencing her work at family events, casually folding her name into conversations the way one mentions someone important. Lev's team just partnered with a health ministry on a new access program, he'd say, and for once, no one interrupted. And then there was Elena. One evening, long after the others had left a small dinner gathering, Elena lingered. She stood at the kitchen sink, rinsing glasses, when she turned to Olivia with a kind of softness that felt earned. "You know," she said, "I used to wonder how you survived all of this. This wall they built. I would have collapsed under it." Olivia gave a small smile, almost bitter. "You don't survive it. Not really. You just build something taller next to it." Elena dried her hands, then reached for Olivia's. "Well, whatever you built. I see it. And I think they're finally learning to look up." It wasn't just family that began to shift. Friends who had once drifted away reappeared with quiet apologies and clumsy attempts at reconnection. Former colleagues who had once scoffed at her unconventional path now asked to collaborate. One even invited her to speak at a conference she had once been rejected from. But perhaps the most significant transformation came not from others, but from Olivia herself. She no longer flinched when someone asked what she did. She no longer felt the urge to defend her choices. Instead, she spoke with a calm certainty, her voice steady with lived experience. She had stopped asking for a seat at the table. She brought her own. And in doing so, the tables began to turn. Her father, once a stoic pillar of judgment, started asking questions, not just to criticize, but to understand. Her mother, slower to shift, still faltered, but she now made tea when Olivia visited. Small things. Symbolic things. The past hadn't disappeared.
The scars still existed.
But now, they were no longer just reminders of pain. They were evidence of survival, of growth, of an evolution that refused to be denied. Love had always been there, Olivia suspected, twisted under layers of expectation and tradition. But now it was beginning to take shape in a language she could finally hear. It wasn't poetic or perfect. It was clumsy, late, but real. And that was enough. Relationships, once rigid like marble, were becoming like clay, still heavy with history, but now pliable, able to be reshaped by time, humility, and truth. Olivia had not just reclaimed her place in the world. She had altered the gravitational pull of the people around her. The failure they once whispered about in private? She was now the gravity, holding them steady. Success, when it came, didn't wear a crown. It wasn't broadcast on newsreels or plastered across magazine covers. It arrived in quieter ways, through impact, not applause, through change, not ceremony. Olivia didn't feel it all at once. It unfolded gradually, like the first warmth of spring creeping through a long frozen earth. One morning, she awoke to find that her name had been listed, modestly, yet definitively, on a national report about digital equity. It was a footnote, tucked between pages of statistics, but it was there. Olivia Tran, independent architect of community-driven connectivity initiatives. But more than citations, it was the people who carried her work forward that told her something deeper had changed. The woman who had once come to her with a cracked laptop and a broken spirit was now teaching coding basics to children in their neighborhood. A quiet boy who had been too shy to speak in workshops now led community discussions about cybersafety in underserved districts. Her students, once hesitant, eyes filled with the kind of doubt she knew too well, were now launching initiatives of their own. She began receiving messages from strangers, some brief, others painfully detailed. A single mother from Da Nang who used Olivia's shared templates to create a digital resume center. A rural teacher in the Central Highlands who adapted her tutorials into a low-bandwidth education series. A teenager in Saigon who wrote, "You made me believe we could matter, even without perfect English or expensive schools." These weren't trophies or accolades. They were echoes. Echoes of her effort, her resilience, her refusal to fade just because the world had misjudged her. And then there was the invitation. An international summit on inclusive technology, formal, polished, the kind of room she had once been locked out of. She hesitated when she first read the email. The Olivia of a few years ago might have declined, still wearing the remnants of her self-erasure. But now, she clicked accept. When she stood on stage weeks later, dressed in a simple dark suit stitched by the same seamstress who once loaned her office space, she didn't open with data. She began with silence. A deep, steady breath. Then she told her story. Not the curated version. The raw one. The shame, the exile, the years of invisibility. And then the work, brick by digital brick, that rebuilt her dignity. When she finished, there wasn't thunderous applause. There was something heavier. Stillness. Reflection. The kind that signals not entertainment, but truth being heard. Afterward, a delegate from South Africa approached her. "You didn't just share a solution," she said. "You reminded us what justice feels like in motion." It was in that moment Olivia understood. She was no longer the subject of a redemption arc. She had become a conduit. What she had started was no longer just hers. It had become a model, a vocabulary, a possibility for others. Back home, she found a small bouquet at her door. No note. Just her mother's handwriting scrawled on a torn corner of newspaper. "You built something real. We see it now." Success hadn't made her louder. It had made her deeper, rooted, unshakable. She no longer needed the world to look at her. She had taught others to look at themselves differently. Legacy wasn't about being remembered. It was about making sure others never had to feel forgotten. And so, as the work spread and took on lives of its own, Olivia did not rise above. She remained among the people, the stories, the quiet revolutions she had helped spark. Success, in the end, wasn't a spotlight. It was a ripple. And Olivia, once dismissed as a failure, had become the stone. It took Olivia years to understand that living truthfully wasn't a destination. It was a series of quiet decisions, made over and over again, in rooms without witnesses and in moments that offered no applause. It wasn't about grand epiphanies or cinematic breakthroughs. It was a slow return to the self, piece by piece, layer by layer. By the time she moved into the small home by the edge of the city, she had stopped explaining herself. The garden was modest, the furniture mismatched, the shelves filled with books and secondhand mugs gifted by students. It was not impressive by conventional standards, but every object had a story. Every corner held silence she had earned. She no longer flinched when she saw old classmates succeed in ways she hadn't. She no longer compared. Her life didn't need to compete. It needed only to align. There were days she still felt the weight of her family's years of disappointment. There were days when loneliness sat across the room like a ghost she had learned to coexist with. But even on those days, she no longer questioned whether she was enough. She had built something real. She had mattered. And that mattered more than being understood. On quiet Sundays, she would walk to the park near the local community center, where the Wi-Fi hub she'd helped install now gave kids access to free resources. She'd sit on a bench and listen to the world as it moved around her. No one recognized her. No one knew that she was the reason many of them were connected, supported, safer. And that was all right. She had stopped needing recognition to justify her worth. She had already recognized herself. Sometimes, she would run into her father there, his health quieter now, his steps more careful. They rarely said much. But once, as he handed her a small bag of tangerines, he said simply, "Your mother says you never quit." Olivia smiled.
No.
"I just stopped pretending." That night, as she lit a single lamp by her window and opened a notebook to draft her next community project, she paused. Looked around, exhaled. There was no drama to her life anymore. No proving ground. No masked ambition. Just purpose. Just peace. She had once believed that living truthfully would come at the cost of love, family, or belonging. But she'd learned the opposite. That truth, when held long enough, reshaped the space around it. It became gravity. It became home. And in that stillness, she wrote not for validation, but from clarity. Not to defend her life, but to continue it. The world hadn't given her much, but she had given herself everything. And finally she knew she was not late.
She was exactly on time.
Living her life, her way, fully, truly, enough.